Hi, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Jean Balfour. I work as an organisation consultant and coach and facilitator, as well as being the program director of our ICF accredited coach training program. Today, what I'm going to do is share with you some thoughts and insights that I have about working with people through a career transition and through changes in the workplace, and to think about how coaching can work. We're using GoToWebinar as an app today, and many of you may be familiar with this, but for those of you who are new, there are a couple of ways that you can interact with me in the workshop today. The first is that we'll do a poll at some stage, so I'd invite you to participate in that. And the second is that at any stage you can type a question into the question and answer space, and I will answer that question on the line here. So I won't type in the answer, I'll speak the answer, I'll share the answer with you. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask them as we go through. So I'd like to welcome the people we have today from all around the region, people from Singapore and Hong Kong, people from the Philippines, India, Malaysia, Australia, Thailand and Vietnam. And we like having these sessions on a Friday because we think it's an opportunity to take time to reflect on the week and to think about a bit of learning in this environment. So I'd like to start with a personal story. About 20 years ago, I got a job that for me, I really considered to be my dream job. I was head of organisation development in a large organisation, and I had a role on the executive team. And I'd really worked hard to get this job. About 6 months into the role, I was feeling really shaky. I'd really lost my confidence and was beginning to think the role wasn't for me, and was actively thinking about resigning. So I went just to see my boss, who was the CEO, and thought it would be good to have a conversation with him. And I told him the story, said to him I was really feeling vulnerable, not sure I was the right person for the role. And he just looked at me and he laughed really gently and said, "Oh my goodness, you're just going through this change experience that we have when we go into a new role. And I think you're the right person." And he then went on and had a really gracious coaching conversation with me. And I remember leaving his office. I can see it so vividly. I left his office feeling much better, much calmer. And I went on in that role for 3 years to have one of the most fulfilling roles of my career. And I'm sure if he hadn't been such a gracious person and a good coach, that I may have left. I may have moved out of that role, and it would have been both a regret for me and I really believe a regret for him as well. And so he helped to stop that happening. And in today's session, I want to talk about these types of transitions that we all have at many times through our careers. It's not something that just happens to one person. We all have forms of career transition. And what's the best way that we can understand what's happening to us, and what's the best way that we can seek a bit of help from family, from mentors, from colleagues in that transition period. So Mark Twain said, "The only person who likes change is a baby with a wet diaper." And I think this is kind of a bit of a flippant phrase, but the truth is that even people like me who say, "I love change, I kind of embrace it and enjoy it," actually have to go through some sort of psychological transition in order to adapt to the change. Because the truth is that as humans, we really like what's familiar. And so anything new can throw us into a state of flux. So in today's session, I'd like to share with you some frameworks that might help us to think about what's happening to us in that state of flux and in that transition period, and some of the ways that we can help to ease that process and to make it more comfortable for us. But let's do a poll and see which of these transitions have you experienced recently, maybe in the last 2 or 3 years, to see how many transitions and experiences that you've had. So for this poll, all you need to do is just to click on the one that's relevant for you. For some of you, there may be none. And that's fine. No need to participate if that's the case. But we'll see what sort of changes we have, and then I'll share it. And just for those of you unfamiliar with polls, we can't, of course, see who's putting the answer in, so you're not sharing anything that will be shared with others. So just leave it for a couple of minutes. Have you moved into a new role? Have you had a new manager? And maybe you've experienced redundancy, which is incredibly common in our modern workforces. So I'm going to close the poll and share the results with you now. So what we're seeing is that quite a few of you are saying, well, I've had a new role recently in the last couple of years. We see many people moving roles maybe every 2 or 3 years. Some a new manager. This is a curious transition that I think we don't often think through enough. And actually, I think this is often a period of actually quite a bit of change for people in the workplace. Yeah. So thank you for sharing that with us. So transition, it's common. Many of us are experiencing it. Let me just start here by saying that I want to differentiate between change and transition. So the change is the thing that happens to us. It's kind of the external event. So in my example, the change was the new role that I had, the promotion. It was a merged organisation, so there was a lot of change going on. There was also really a new organisation. That was the change, the outside piece that's happening. The transition is the psychological journey that we go through when we're experiencing and adapting to the change. It's the journey I as a human being have to go to before I kind of move into feeling comfortable in the new place. It's that adjusting that we make to feel settled in a place. I'm often coaching people who have moved countries and in their roles, and the experience that they have is a lot of transition, a lot of a big change, the change of a new country, but there's also that kind of psychological adapting to new cultures, to new ways of working, and even the little things can affect us. How do we get to work? There's a transition until we become comfortable with that travel to work. Everything is new in that space. And perhaps the most useful model to help us understand this is William Bridges' transition model, which he published in a fabulous book called Managing Transitions in 2003. And we're going to use this model really as a framework today for the conversation. What he said was that when we go through any transition, he saw 3 main phases to this transition, and that it was important that we paid attention to these changes. He talks about the level of management that we offer to the changes. I would suggest the level of coaching, actually, because I think it's as much about the coaching support that we give to people through any form of transition that they're experiencing. And he described each of these 3 stages as the ending. That's the dark blue bit on the screen, the sort of stage of letting go and losing what was familiar to us. The neutral zone, which is where we move out of the old, but we're not yet familiar and comfortable with the new. And then the transition into the new beginning and beginning to become familiar and comfortable with this new stage. And at each of these parts or stages of this transition, he saw some things that might be happening. So what we see often at the beginning of a transition period or at the end of the old is people perhaps being shocked and denying that anything's changed. We know from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's model on grief, death and dying that the early stage of any loss often comes with a denial, that we see that is it really happening? I don't really believe this change is happening. But then when we begin to see that something is happening around us, even a very positive change, we can begin to feel a bit resistant or in some cases a bit angry about it because we lose the familiar, we lose what we knew. And that can cause quite a bit of internal discomfort in us and a sense of how am I going to cope? What's going to happen here? And then we begin to come into the neutral zone. We begin to feel a bit more like maybe this is going to be okay. And so we start to be a bit questioning and cautiously move in. But this period is also attached to anxiety. Do I know do I know what I can do? How is this going to work? What's going to happen? And so I might be a bit tentative. If you think about somebody, a new leader moving into a role, this is a pretty tough time because new leaders are expected to come in and lead, but internally they may be going through this period of feeling a bit anxious about it. Will I be a good enough leader? Can I lead in this organization? So we've got this sense of confusion and concern, and maybe at this stage we're not performing at our best. We see often in this neutral zone when people are in new roles or in new organizations that there's so much to become familiar with. I often laugh and say, until you know how to work the printer and the photocopier or where you can get tea and coffee, you can't begin to deal with any of the other stuff, because all of those little bits are about us becoming familiar in this space. Then we've got the stage of the new beginning. So we're beginning to relax a bit. We're beginning to feel a bit more confident. We're beginning to kind of open up into this new space. This may be attached with exploration, awareness of what's new, but also perhaps a bit of guilt because we've left behind the old. Was it okay to leave behind the old as we excitedly move into the new? This is also the stage where, as our confidence is growing, we're more open to feedback. How am I doing? Is my leadership style working here? How am I doing as a new parent? Is it okay? Am I managing the balance between being at work and managing being a parent and looking after my kids okay? Can you just give me a bit of help and support with that? So at this stage, we begin to open up. And you can see here from the curve that this is the stage where perhaps we're needing slightly less support and management and coaching as we begin to open up. But we still do need some at this stage. And I think that at each of these stages, a coach or a leader or a manager, whoever's supporting us through this, can help us. At the early stage, at this place of endings, they can be empathizing, listening, encouraging, supporting us, really allowing space to think through whatever's going on so that we can let the feelings rise up and release them, so that we can begin to come in to the open stage. They can help at the neutral zone of helping to paint a big picture, so connect us into what's possible and what might be, but also thinking about some short-term goals and some short-term wins, really, to think about what are the options here. Also in the neutral zone, often a lot of problems arise because they're things we don't know how to do, things we don't know how to work with. And this is an opportunity for somebody to help us to work through those problems, think about how they might benefit from coming up with solutions. And then, of course, at the new beginning stage, we can move into offering feedback on how things are going and begin to get a bit creative and challenging and saying, okay, let's get going quickly. Each of us will move through these stages at different speeds, and we may go forwards and come backwards a bit. This is not going to be specifically linear, and the nature of the curves on this slide show that it's not a neat, tidy process. But we can at least be aware that we will be personally going through a lot of this as we go through some sort of change. We'll be experiencing this transition. But I also believe that there's another thing at play here. And that's that our brains are affecting how we feel and our experience of this. So even if a change is really good for us, the fact is that our limbic system and our amygdala is really there to protect us and keep us safe. And it's on the constant lookout for any danger. And I think that in a change period or a time of things adjusting, often our amygdala can be a bit more on the alert and say, wait a minute, I don't know how to deal with this situation. I don't know how to access parts of the brain. This is new. And it can feel like we get flooded with a bit more emotion because of this and feel like we can't think straight because our brain isn't operating. You will know, I'm sure, and be familiar with when the amygdala triggers the fight, flight, or freeze response, then the oxygen is going to our vital organs to keep us so that we can run away from danger, even if that danger, is it? A new boss, our brain saying, this is a new boss, this is danger. Of course, it's not at all dangerous, but our brain is not very discerning in that. And so at this point, we may not be able to think that straight because we perhaps haven't, we're flooded with emotion a bit about worrying about it, and we're also not got as much oxygen going to our brain. And I think that part of the transition is to help somebody to let go of the emotion, to notice, wow, that's actually what I'm feeling. I'm feeling a bit frightened and my system's gone into a bit of overdrive of looking after me, and I can let that go so that I can think straight and work out what's next. And so a good conversation with somebody can help release that. In my own story, I think that's exactly what happened. I think my boss helped me to look at it clearly. I calmed down immediately. I came out of that meeting and I could see clearly. So he just helped to release the emotion, get rid of that caught emotion so that I could begin to think clearly and move out of that into a space. I guess by reassuring me as my boss as well, he actually took away some of the fear that I wasn't good enough in the role, and that also released me in that space and I could feel confident. So it's all about helping us really, I think, to come in to be able to think rationally and clearly. And some of that is about acknowledging the emotion and the pressure that we feel in transition periods so that we can let it go and move on into the new. So to help us with that, we've got many people, and I've talked about this. It could be a colleague, a manager, a former coach, a mentor, or a friend or family who can help us talk us through these stages. So I'm curious about what they could do at each of these stages, and I've really been thinking about this. So I'd like to share with you, if you're perhaps a friend and you've got somebody who's going through a transition, perhaps they're a new mum, or they've gone into a new job, or perhaps they've been made redundant. What can we do to have a coaching conversation with them at each stage? So first of all, at the ending stage, we can help them to work out what's changing and what stayed the same. So usually there's some things that have stayed the same. Even in things like redundancy, some things have stayed the same. We've still got the stability of friends and family who are there to support us. We've probably got colleagues from old organisations. We've got a network from previous roles. We have some stability in our system. It's not that everything has ended. But also, as I've been saying, about helping us to expect, to feel, and to accept those feelings, whatever they are, to help the person to think about what are you feeling, and to acknowledge that that's okay, to have those strong feelings, even if the change is a good one, as mine was. But also to think about compensating for the losses. There are losses. It's important for us to acknowledge that. So the losses may be the loss of the familiar. They may also be the loss of a role or the loss of free time if I'm a new parent. Whatever those losses are, they'll be there. But looking for what's the compensation for those losses. It's very important also, I think, to mark the ending, to acknowledge that this is an ending. This is the finishing of a period and we're moving into a new period, because that helps the psychological transition to be smoother. But also to treat the past with respect. I see this so often. Perhaps a new boss comes in and they say, well, that was the past and this is the new. I think it's important for us to acknowledge all the good that has gone before and all the good that brought us to this stage. And even through the shock of redundancy, for example, there were good things that happened in that period and probably good things that happened in that role, even though for some people the ending wasn't very pleasant. It's good to treat the past through, to look at it in the whole and in the round. In the neutral zone, we can help people by helping them explore the new. It's not yet stabilized. I was having a conversation with somebody recently who's in a very new role and really trying to explore what she can do to apply what she's learned before into this new situation, because she hasn't kind of made that adjustment. We can see that things are in a state of flux, and so we can support people through it. At this stage, we often do feel a bit confused, or we're not sure how things are working or what's happening, and it can feel a bit sort of vague and fluid. But we can also start to look to the new in the neutral phase. So we can begin to say, what are the opportunities? What are the new beginnings that you can begin to explore? And also, what are the things that you can look for as quick wins or early successes? So how can you identify what's going well in this new phase and begin to move into that? And finally, we've got this phase of the new beginnings. And at this stage, when somebody's beginning to feel more comfortable in this new space, we can begin to think about how does this connect to your individual goals and what you want to achieve, and how do you get clarity and connect that to the organization's purpose and goals. We're increasingly seeing the link between purpose, our own purpose and organizational purpose or team purpose, and the connection between these two things being fundamental to our own motivation and ability to work effectively. And so at this stage, we can really help people make that connection. We can also help them feel that emerging energy for the new. If you remember it, when you're in those new phases, there is also a bit of an excitement about this new, and helping people connect into it can be very powerful. And of course, we can celebrate successes at this stage. What I'd like to do now is to take you into a few examples and just briefly share with you how this might play out in some examples. So I'm going to start with redundancy, because I think this is the one that can be very shocking. So the first thing I witness with people when I'm coaching them in a redundancy situation is that they tend to go into the amygdala being in charge, a kind of fight, flight, or freeze reaction, some form of shock, fear, anger, disappointment, hurt. It's surprising to me, or perhaps it's no longer surprising to me, that even if a redundancy is expected and actually is not seen as a negative thing by the person, it can still have that level of shock and hurt that goes with it. And I think that because any form of redundancy is actually feels like a form of rejection, even if it's our whole team is made redundant, it can still feel very personal. This is happening to me. And so the most important thing that we can do at this early stage and help support somebody in a redundancy, in the transition through a redundancy period, is to help them to expect strong feelings and to help them release them. So to work through them, to sit with the person in those feelings, because unless they're able to release those feelings, they're not then able to think clearly. And so it's just so important that this is how we support somebody at this stage. And then when that's happened, we can help the person through helping them think about practical steps that they can do. But also, if somebody's had that kind of a shock or felt personally hurt by it, they can begin to question whether they were good enough in the role. They can begin to lose sight of their strengths, the depth of their experience. And so I would be very keen to work with somebody at this stage using a strengths-based approach to coaching and helping them think about where their strengths lie, where they've really delivered, where their critical achievements were over their career, because they really need to have that to begin to shore themselves up and feel confident again. The other thing that can help at this stage is also about helping somebody key into what are their key personal values and how is that linked to where they want to go into the future. And all of that is about helping somebody move into the future. I have seen for most of the people I've worked with through a redundancy that it's been a real opportunity to stop and think and take stock, even through the shock of it, and helping sit alongside somebody while they go through this period and helping them to feel the emotion, let go of the emotion, and then support them through all the practical things that need to happen can be a very powerful thing. Secondly, this is what happens in a new role. This is often a positive thing. We see it as really exciting. But the challenge is that every new role actually appears to trigger some sort of confidence question. And that's because we've lost all the familiarity with our old job where we knew how to do it. We were confident. We knew everything. And a new role, I would hope, brings new challenges, new stretch assignments, things that we're not so familiar with, which of course is what makes it exciting, but it can also trigger a bit of a loss in confidence because we don't know how to do them yet. And this triggers questions like, can I do it? Am I experienced enough? Is my past success enough? Have I been promoted to that point I'm not gonna succeed? Lots of kind of fundamental questions about, am I good enough really? A lot of imposter syndrome shows up often for people in new roles. So what we can do if we're coaching them is to help them think about small wins so they can begin to feel that confidence returning. We're basically helping them to say, oh, wait a minute, I know I can do this, to get that shoring up of confidence in that space. We can also help them clarify what's new, completely new learning, because that really needs a whole new approach, if you like. You have to go into that with open eyes. And what's actually just a stretch? You've already done this piece of it. This is just the next level up or the next level sideways. And really, you know how to do this. It's just doing it on a bigger scale, maybe. And also setting short-term goals so that the person sees that they can measure their success and see how they're doing. Then a new manager, often an overlooked period of transition. I know some organisations now have coaching. They're bringing a team together with a new manager to help overcome this transition, and that will help ease the transition, if you like. And I think that's a really good strategy. So what happens when a new manager comes and you start working for somebody new? You're beginning to think, oh, are they going to challenge the status quo? You know, I liked it as it was. This is going to be new. They're going to come in with new ideas. They might not like the way it was done in the past. And so this is a challenge. And what I observe in these situations is that often this can impact through a loss of trust, that basically we don't trust each other yet, and that can be a problem. And the way of dealing with this, I think, is really to focus early on building trust. And trust comes, I think, through two places here. One is through building the quality of relationship, spending time together, getting to know each other. As I've seen the neuroscience around this, I've become increasingly aware of the importance of team events, opportunities when there's a new manager, really learn how they work, sharing how you work, opening up the channels of communication so that you can really begin to connect and be able to work through the relationship, have energy in the relationship to help you work. We can do this by creating opportunities to talk about vision and purpose, to help make sure that we're aligned with their vision and purpose. So even if they do want to do things differently, we know why. We understand the context for that. Again, it's back to early success criteria. What will it look like if we're working well together? And also sharing success and experience. And so for me, if I'm reporting to a new manager, I'm going to be keen to share some of that so that they understand where I've come from. They understand what is it that I bring to my role, what do I bring to my team, to the organisation, and how I can support them in that new role. And the fourth area that I want to think about is to think about parental leave, or maternity leave, we sometimes call it. This is a really critical transition because if I'm a new mum, I'm going through many different types of transitions. I'm going through the transition to my identity as moving from a working woman to a working mother, but I'm also got a different identity probably in the workplace and in my family. A lot of transition is going on through this period. And I believe this is a period where we can really support people, men and women, as they move into this new phase of their lives as new parents. And by doing this, we help them to stay focused at work in an appropriate way, help them to think about where are they in their career, what's this transition period saying about where they want to go next and how that works for them, and help them think about what does it mean to be successful at work when I'm juggling more priorities and perhaps more tensions than I did prior to this stage of my life. I've also seen that maternity coaching can actually be an opportunity for somebody to think about their leadership role and their leadership journey. It's a taking stock period, if you like. So if we can be very proactive in doing that, then that can be very powerful. Parental or maternity coaching can really also support organisations. It helps open up the discussion between the working parent and the line manager and people in the organisation to think about how can they prepare for the leave? How can they plan for the transition back into the workplace? And how can everybody be clear about what's happening? And so we suggest doing this in a number of ways, but actually what I'm going to do now is invite my colleague, Imogen Maresch, to join me. Imogen's going to is willing to share a few of her experiences. So welcome, Imogen, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Jean.
Thanks, welcome. Just to say a little bit about Imogen before I ask her a couple of questions. Imogen's a facilitator and a coach, and she's been an active champion of women in the workplace for a long time. She has 2 children, both children born here in Singapore, and has her own experiences of transitioning from being a working mum to a working non-mother to be a working mother. That's a bit clumsy, but that's what we're saying. And also to help to supporting women through their own transition in work. So Imogen, I wonder if you could start by sharing a bit of your own experience of this transition period.
Yeah, absolutely. As you say, both my children were born here in Singapore, and I think that provides a different kind of challenge sometimes to not have the family network around you. And one thing I noticed that I really needed was to reach out to my own new networks, those networks of other new mothers, but also networks of friends who had previously gone through this transition, and that was really useful for me.
But about how you support women through this transition period in their career.
Yes, of course. So I think it can be, as you say, quite an emotional time, and I think it's one of the things that I notice, certainly from my own experience, and that I notice in many of the women that I coach, is that returning to work can be a challenging time for lots of different reasons. One of the things and the themes that I notice, and I certainly noticed this in myself, is that when we've been outside of the workforce for some time, and I in the end took 2 years in my journey to have my children, the confidence in our ability can start to be impacted. And one of the things that I invite women to do is, before they go on to maternity leave, ideally, to really reconnect with what their strengths are and their achievements are. So really kind of building that sort of short CV that they can look back on when they need to. And I think it's really an important time, because often it's the time where we need to be the strongest, because we're often negotiating the terms that we're going to get when we get back into the workforce. I think the second area for me is a very practical one, which is looking at the actions that you can take both before and after around things like who's going to manage the work when you're not there, what's the handover process, but also the relationships. Whose support do you need, and how can you reach out and have the conversation with those people? And that's both inside and outside of work. You know, we have a broad support network that is there. And I think some of the key areas to touch on there for me are around understanding what the assumptions we might be holding are about what our boss is thinking, what our boss wants from us, what the demands will be, but also from the other party. So often we work with line managers to open up those channels of communication, so that often it may be that actually people are concerned that they won't be getting those stretching assignments when they come back to work, whereas the manager may be feeling that they're going to give more simple work because that's what they think that the person returning to work might need. So it's really about opening those channels of communication. And then for me, the final area really is about this helping people explore their sense of self and how that's shifted through this transition. And I think that's a really important area, because helping people connect with the values, the things that really matter to them at this time of change, can help them to feel empowered to make good decisions. But it also helps to re-examine what you want to let go of in order to be able to move into the next area of the next stage of your life. And one of the things that I've noticed, particularly in myself, but also in the clients I've worked with, is sometimes the patterns of work that we have worked to that have got us to the success we have today, and not necessarily the patterns and ways of working that will help us to now thrive in this new world. and being able to examine and look at some of those and bring them to light, and then make choices about where you want to direct your behavior, the things you want to keep and the things that you want to choose to let go of now in the way that you work, helps, I think, to create that sense of work-life fit that's so important at this stage.
Brilliant. Thank you, Imogen, for sharing that and for sharing that story. And I think what I'm hearing you say is that it's just the most fundamental thing is about the relationship and the quality of conversation that people have about expectations and in the stage of transition, as well as helping people connect with themselves and what's important to them in that phase. Yeah, brilliant.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I think that's exactly it.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing today. So thanks very much to Imogen for sharing that with us. And I think that what we've seen and what we read in the research is that really supporting women through this phase and helping the transition actually has a direct impact on women's both returning to work and their experience of returning to work and their performance when they're back at work. And so it can have a fundamental difference in careers at this stage. So I'm going to pause now to see if anybody has any questions about anything we've covered. All of this is talking about these 3 stages or phases of transition as we go through change. And we've got an opportunity now to take any questions, and we hope the technology works. The storm has now reached me here, so we hope that all is well with that. But if you have any questions, please do ask them via the question bar in your toolbar. And we have a change. So while we're doing that and seeing if there's any questions, perhaps just to come on and tell you a little bit about one of the things that we've been doing for the last year, and that is that we've been training and developing people to become accredited coaches with the International Coach Federation. And this, of course, has been a transition for us as well in our new business. And we're running our program 100% virtual, bearing with the technology challenges, actually, which we've had very few. We work with a tool called Zoom, and we run the coaching program in a sort of bite size, so 3-hour workshops. And so far, we've had people from all around the APAC region, as well as people from the UK and the Middle East, and a real mix of people through the program. Senior directors, we've had chief HR officers, consultants, people working in financial services, people working in other sectors, and people actually who are not yet in work and are working, full-time working parents, if you like, or are carers. And the program focuses on coaching at work and in organisations. So we're primarily focused on helping people to be effective and skilled coaches to help people think about some of the working challenges that they have and some of their career transition periods as well. We've enjoyed using the technology in the virtual environment, and so people access from wherever they are. We've had people dialing in from the swimming pool in Spain and from the office in Sydney, so really from all over. And the program includes a lot of practice, so we really help people to learn the skill of coaching through practicing in depth. There's lots of information here. We have a mix of theory and practice. It's, as I said, it's very focused on work, and it's designed for people who have a busy working life. I spoke to somebody this week who was saying actually that for her this is a great opportunity to do some personal development that she can fit around her busy working life. If you're interested, we run regular preview sessions of the program, and you can find the link to these preview sessions on our website. The program has kind of 4 modules. We do the first one, which is really an introduction to the core coaching skills. We then go deeper on those skills. We take that on and then learn more tools and techniques, and finally have a module that's really about work and organisations. And the way we teach coaching is that we believe that you start by learning the core skills and practicing the core skills, and then we slowly add depth and breadth into that. We also do a lot of practice in the mentor coaching sessions. And of course, because it's an accredited program, you are expected to write assignments. And there's 2 assignments for that program. So if you'd like to do that or join our mailing list to join our regular lunchtime webinars, please do join that via the website, or you can also, as I say, join the preview sessions for the coaching program from the website. We've still got time for any questions, but if you don't feel you have any questions, I'd like to thank you for joining us today and really thank Imogen for sharing her experience. And please do reach out if you have any questions, and I wish you a happy weekend.